watching StuyInterviews!
Hi everyone, my name is Ms. Samit and I'm the founder of StuyInterviews. Today, we're presenting you with a bunch of Stuyvesant students giving advice on the SHSAT. October is usually the time people start prepping for the exam, so we thought, why not start now? And here are pieces of advice from students who ace the exam. The SHSAT is an exam you take to get into one of the specialized high schools in New York City. So I'll start with the first piece of advice. I would say always do the section you're better at first, or at least experiment with that. Personally, I'm better at math, and I saw once I started doing the math section first, since you could kind of choose, my scores improved so much. So experiment as much as you can with testing early on and see what's better for you. So you'll just see a bunch of different students giving advice just like that.
Hi everyone, my name is Grace and I'm a rising sophomore at Stuyvesant High School. I'm not going to say what score I got on the exam, but it got me into Stuyvesant. So I think my greatest piece of advice would to not be afraid to skip around on the exam. There's no rule that says there's a specific order you need to follow. Just if you can't answer one question, don't be ashamed, don't feel bad, and don't try to do it. Just skip on to the next question and come back to it later. There's no point in you taking 10 minutes to answer one question when you could be using that time to answer 5. So my second piece of advice is not as general. It's to those who have a little trouble focusing when it comes to passages that are not that very interesting. That was for me, my case, I guess. My advice for that would be to kind of still take a lot of notes and annotate the passage. Spend a lot of time reading the passage, understanding it, not just rereading it over and over again because you didn't get anything. Just underline, summarize paragraphs, do everything, do anything. Just jot down things that you found interesting, things that you might find helpful in the future when you're answering the questions. And if I find that whenever I find a passage like interesting, it's easier for me to answer the questions because like the details are more memorable. That's all of my advice, and I wish you all good luck. And okay, bye.
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I'm an incoming freshman to Stuyvesant High School. Okay, for the video, I'm gonna break it up into 4 parts: grammar, ELA, math, and then just advice in general for everything. So I would say first for grammar, this section, I'm pretty sure it's pretty short and it's pretty easy as long as you know basic grammar. But I would say like you can get tripped up because some of the answers to certain questions are pretty similar, so it could be hard to distinguish which ones are the correct ones. So okay, and then ELA. The biggest piece of advice I would say for this one is just make sure you read the questions carefully. I know people, and I've done this too, where I misread the question, so then we ended up misinterpreting what it meant. So just make sure that you read every word of the question and understand what it's asking for before you answer it. Okay, and then I would say this is for both ELA and grammar. This is something that I struggled with when I was taking practice tests and tests, but like don't overthink your first choice or like what you put down already. When I was checking my work, I would like change it to another answer when I knew the first one was correct, just because I tricked myself into thinking like I was wrong for some reason. So just make sure, just don't overthink and don't try to trick yourself when you know you're correct. Okay, but then I was and then mostly for ELA, I would say just everybody's different in how they digest information. Like some people might like to annotate passages, some people might not. It's really up to you and how you do it. Everybody's different in how they, read, so just do whatever helps you the most. So for my math, what I remember is a lot of 7th grade math, and I did struggle with that just because I had studied a lot of just I guess probability and stuff, which I guess was taught in 7th grade, but I didn't study everything in 7th grade math, so I really struggled when I took the actual test and I didn't know certain phrases. So I ended up having to guess on those questions. I would say just make sure that you know important phrases and vocabulary, because they can come in handy when you're taking the actual test. Okay, so in general, I would say don't spend too much time on one question, especially when you have a lot more to get done, because it's better to finish an entire section and have that one question left than be stuck on that one question and then have an entire section left that's empty. So just don't spend too much time on one question. And then for me, when I was taking practice tests and when I took the actual test, I took breaks like in between, maybe 15 to 20 minutes. For 10 seconds I would like look around the room, like look out the window, just to like help my brain reset, and it really got me back into testing mode. So I would say, like, if you have the time for it, take breaks, because it really does help you during the actual test. And yeah, that's basically all of my advice for SHSAT.
Hi, I'm Inara. I'm a rising senior, and I don't remember my SHSAT score, but I do remember spending a lot of time prepping for it. I think I studied SHSAT content for a little over a year, and it really helped me become familiar with the format and the types of questions that I would see. But I will say that the duration of your SHSAT prep period isn't necessarily as important as like the quality of it. So it really boils down to using the right resources and making the most effective use of your time. In that sense, you'll want to work smarter, not harder. So focusing in on the very specific mistakes that you're making during practice tests and being aware of your strengths and weaknesses. As for resources, I would highly recommend a private tutor if you're able to get one, because first of all, you'll save yourself a lot of time looking for the right practice materials and prep books on your own, because most of the time a tutor will provide those things for you, and through experience they tend to know which materials work best for students, and sometimes they do make their own materials, so you can't really access those anywhere else. But more importantly, having a person explain difficult concepts to you goes a really long way in improving with topics that you are struggling with. With that being said, a lot of prep books have an explanation section, like in the back of the book. It'll usually be after the practice tests, it'll just go through each question and briefly explain it. Those explanations are pretty concise, but that does mean that they usually don't go too far into detail and don't provide multiple ways to solve the question. So because of that, having an actual person to explain these things to you, especially with questions that you really don't understand, they can be a lot more flexible in the way they explain it, and they can also show you different approaches to solving this same problem. So that could be really helpful. My family actually runs a tutoring center. It's called Ideal Tutorial, and they have SHSAT prep programs, so that's a little shameless plug in case you're interested. But even if you do decide to study for the SHSAT by yourself and without a tutor, it's definitely something that you can study and practice on your own and still do really well on. Especially if you're self-studying, a really good practice book is key. Personally, I would recommend Kaplan because they tend to be really comprehensive, and for me, it was really similar to what I saw on the actual test. I think the Princeton Review also makes a couple of SHSAT books, and those could be good too. But the number one thing that I recommend anyone to get is the official SHSAT student handbook specific to your year. They're free. It's usually provided by schools, but if you didn't get one from your school, I'm pretty sure you can find it online. And the reason it's important to look through that is because it explains in depth the test format, any potential changes to the SHSAT for your year, the amount of time you'll have on each section, the types of questions in each section, the subjects that might appear in your test, sample problems, and also sample answer sheets. Speaking of which, I think sample answer sheets are really helpful to use because, like, when you're bubbling in the actual answers for your practice tests, it's really helpful because, like, you get used to it, and obviously all of your practice tests should be timed like the actual test, but when you factor in bubbling time when you're taking your practice tests, the way you pace yourself is a lot more similar to the real test because you're actually going through the same motions that you would be during the test. Another great free resource is Google. As long as you know what topics that you need to study, you can look them up and learn online. For example, for math, you'll mostly need to know like linear algebra, but you might also need to know a little bit of geometry, like transversal lines, maybe some circles, right triangles, and there will be just a few formulas that won't be provided to you on the reference sheet that you would need to memorize. So you could look online for those types of things. Also, for like the editing section, you'll want to be familiar with certain grammar rules like tenses, pluralization, punctuation, and it would also help to know about things like dangling modifiers in case anything specific like that shows up on the test. Also, a really big tip I have is to remember that within sections, you don't have to do the questions in any particular order. So you don't have to start at question 1 and finish at the last question in the section. You can do them in any order you want. So you might choose to go in order, but there are a lot of cases where skipping around can help you. So for example, let's say with reading, you know that you're better with certain types of passages. It would be really smart to start with those types of passages and rack up the points from the questions on those passages and then do the rest. Also, a really useful tip I have for math is to actually start with the last couple of questions, which are going to be grid-in questions. So in case you aren't familiar, that means that you're going to have to write out the answer and there aren't going to be answer choices. So what commonly happens is that if you're running low on time towards the end of the test for math sections, the grid-in section is sort of just the questions that end up getting left blank because it's really hard to just guess and come up with a random number. But if you do those first, you can get those out of the way, get those numbers down, and then move on to the multiple choice. And if worse comes to worse and you're running low on time towards the end, all you'll have left is multiple choice, and those are much easier to guess than grid-ins. So yeah, that's a really good way to make sure you don't miss out on all those points from the grid-ins. And also, in general, for math, the order of the questions usually goes from easiest to hardest across multiple choice. So after you've knocked out the grid-in section, I would start at the beginning of the multiple choice section and get those easier questions instead of spending all your time on the harder questions at the end of the multiple choice section. Especially because all of the multiple choice are worth the same amount of points. So a harder question isn't necessarily going to be valued more and get you more points than doing an easier one. And above all, the best piece of advice is to not panic because it's really easy to blank and forget things under pressure. So you want to try your best to stay calm and rational during your test. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Good luck to anyone taking it, and I'm sure you'll do great.
Okay, so some tips for the SAT. The SHSAT. I'm doing this at 12. I'm not okay. Some tips for the SHSAT. Okay. Well, first off, the SHSAT is a joke, so you shouldn't waste your time on it. No, I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness though, don't cram the day before the SHSAT or on the day of the SHSAT because you will regret it so much. Like, I'm speaking from personal experience here, just don't cram. Spend the day before the SHSAT getting a good night's rest, and eating good food, doing stuff that you love. Forget about the SHSAT. And when you're taking the exam, don't look at the clock. Like, don't do that. Literally, do not do that. Just trust your instincts. Because if you obviously, studied for it, your hard work will pay off eventually. So, it really just depends on your efforts.
Hello, my name is Samari Noel, and I'm a rising junior. Unfortunately, I do not remember what I got on the SHSAT. But clearly it was good enough. I mean, I got into Stuyvesant, which was the first on my list of schools that I wanted to go to. So I guess I'll just be giving you guys some advice as well as sharing my journey on taking the SHSAT. That way, you guys will gain some information from what I did. So I went to a program. I went to the Dream program, which is this free tutoring for the SHSAT. I didn't pay big bucks to get tutored or anything. Honestly, even before, I found out about the program from school, and before that, I really wasn't considering going to tutoring. I was kind of just gonna do my own thing and take the test. But I purchased a Kaplan book. It was a purple Kaplan book. and I would show it to you guys, but I gave it away, so I can't show it to you guys. And I would just like study a couple minutes every single day. I think honestly I could have pushed myself to do a little bit better, but I was in the 8th grade. I mean, I'm kidding. But I think like practicing like 30 minutes a day would have been better for me than like whatever I did, because it wasn't working. But I went to the program, and I don't really remember the setup of it because it was like a long time ago. But I remember we'd have like some days dedicated to like tutoring, like consistently, like 3 days in a row, tutoring on like math and English. Like we'd go to English and then we'd go to math. And then like the 4th day, we'd take a practice test. And from there you can kind of see how you're doing, if you are set to take the SHSAT and do well on the SHSAT, or if you need to push yourself in certain areas. I remember my first practice test, I remember doing like pretty terrible, and then after that I got better because I could see like where I messed up. So I think taking practice tests are really important. Kaplan books have practice tests in them, so you can definitely take the tests and make sure you're in an area that's like pretty similar to what it would look like when you're taking the test. So like in a silent room, you have like your pencils, your water. Actually, I don't think we're allowed to have drinks. That's another conversation though. But just putting yourself in that situation and taking the test and seeing where your weaknesses are and improving your weaknesses rather than just focusing on the big picture, because that way like your strengths are already there and you're just like improving your weaknesses so that way you do as good as possible, as well as possible. What else? I think, know the format of the test. That's also really important. I think that happens just by practicing. If you go in to taking the SHSAT not even knowing what the test is going to look like, you're setting yourself up for failure, because the SHSAT isn't about how smart you are. It's really about how well you can do on that specific test, how you can master the SHSAT. And that all comes with knowing the format. Practice books, especially the Kaplan, because that's what I had. I don't know about any other practice books, but they're exactly the same as the SHSAT, just with different questions. So like if you can master just the strategy behind answering those questions, you'll do amazing on the SHSAT. It's literally just mastery instead of knowledge. That's literally what it's testing. So just know that it has an English section, a writing section, which is like grammar, and math. Yeah, I think also it's really just practice, because that way you know like how to pace your time, how to strategize the test, how to, like, for example, if you're doing like math, you go through the easier questions. That way you can like rack up enough points and spend more time on the harder questions and not worry about it as much, because you know you're already set because you got all your easier questions in the bag. Yeah, it's really just practice. I think you need to have that sense of confidence, like, I know what is on the test, I know how to answer these questions that I see on the test, and that way you'll do as amazing as possible, and you'll probably get into Stuyvesant. But yeah, that's kind of like just what I did and what I would recommend doing. Yeah, there's not really much to it, and I'm not even saying that just because I'm already at Stuyvesant, I already took the test. It's just that the test is a lot easier than it seems. There's nothing to be afraid of. So yeah, thank you.